All right, sir. You have been called a living legend by a lot of people. Why do you think that's so?
Well,
By the way, I meant to say this again. Don't be humble. This is not about humbleness. This is about people who can watch a video 20 years from now, 30 years from now. Hopefully we're in heaven. But they need to know who you are. So this is not the time to be modest. Just let it out.
Well, see, my philosophy in life, it's not just enough to be born and come here, but it's equally important that you make a contribution. And when we look at a dog, he barks if thieves are around. You look at a cat, they keep the rats away. So we have to outdo them.
In terms of your history in Cobb County, would you give us a sort of a chronological picture of who you are? Today you've reached Godfather status, but it didn't start that way however many years ago you were. So just tell us that story about yourself.
Okay. In 1982 I came to Southern Poly as the chief academic officer. Steve Cheshire, we both were at Purdue. We both were heading departments at Purdue, and we worked together as a team. And we had been teaching in England, and we had a few days while the students were boning up to take that comprehensive exam. And so we were in Stockholm when he was offered the job at Southern Poly. And he says, you know who I want to go with me? And I smiled and said, well, no. I'm at Purdue. I was a full professor and tenured professor and all. And I had worked for the Navy for 12 years as a weapons design engineer. And I was a Korean veteran. I wasn't in the Korean War, but I was in during that time. And so that gave me a little credit there. And I'd be the last ones that was laid off. And now I'm at Purdue and I've gotten tenure again. And to come here, it was going to be a non-tenured position. But anyway, as time moved along and I came for the interview, because first of all, when I came for the interview, there was absolutely no African Americans. Because at that time, Southern Poly was 92% white male. And so, first of all, I just knew that I wasn't going to be selected, so I said, I don't have to worry. And then he called me and said, yeah, they told him that, okay, we know you worked with Harris over the years, and if you want to bring him, you can bring him. Now, one of the things that had happened is that Southern Poly had been separated, and we called it Southern Tech then, from Georgia Tech. And they didn't give any transition money. And usually whenever you break off a school from another, you're given some transition money. So they said, no, we're not going to give you any transition money. Also, at that particular point in time, the university system was under a federal court order. This is how many students that you must have, how many African American students. You must also have more African American faculty and staff, because at that time they had one staff person, African American staff person. And so the challenge that I had, one of the jobs that was to make sure of recruiting more minority students and also recruiting more faculty and staff. Now, I had experience because the same thing when I was at Purdue. So one of the things I was kind of responsible for there, in addition to my teaching when I went there, was to bring in more minority students. And the thing that was kind of funny, for an example, I did such a good job as that until my department chair came and said, look, we want to double the size of our department. We had about 250 students in the department, and most of the African American kids was Gary and Annapolis. So that meant that the schools that I was going in, the large majority to do this, had no African Americans. And sure enough, in 2 years, I had went out and recruited enough students that we doubled the size of our student body in the department. But getting back to Southern Poly, we had to get everything all organized. First, we had to come up with what we refer to as the statutes, your operating procedure, what you are bound by. Now, you put this together, but you have a regent's policy of which you used, and what you do in there, it has to match what is in the regent's policy. And so we set out from there. We kept on, and at that time, Joe Mack Wilson, and we talked to Joe Mack, and he would give us a little money and a little money that we could buy equipment. And so over time, everything really began to fall into place. Now, also when I came, we only had one school, and that was just the School of Technology, and everything was to support the school. Now, while I was Chief Academic Officer, I increased that to 4, the School of Architect, the schools of the School of Architect, the School of Business, and also we brought in the School of Arts and Sciences at the school. So one of the things that pulled all of that together, had to get all of that approved by the Chancellor's office. So when we look at the foundation over at Southern Poly, as it also, while I was there, and you have to do certain things if you're going to get university status, and we did all of those things that enabled us to get university status. So if I summed up, on my major contribution there was the organization and structure and getting those 4 schools, and they all approved, and they all had a couple of hundred students. And then the next part is we're in the recruiting and seeking and bringing in minority faculty and staff. And we also, the numbers was 15%, and I think I had ended up that we had 18%. And so we were able to accomplish our mission there.
Did you ever think about the fact you were changing the history of Cobb County while you were changing the school? A lot of the kids in that school, as you well know, with work with Lockheed. When I was at Georgia Power, we hired more Southern Poly graduates than we did Georgia Tech because of the quality of the quality of the student, their orientation towards implementation, not theory.
Right.
So,
one thing before you continue, I'm not here. Answer all your questions to him. I noticed you glanced at me.
He's a handsome guy, but
yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Okay.
We all know that.
So what years did you play that role? What year did you come in and start that change process?
Well, I came in 1982, and I left in 1998. I was there 16 years, and it's very unusual that you have a person that lasts 16 years as the chief academic officer, but I was there for 16 years.
Did you realize you were changing? I started this question a second ago. Did you realize that you were not only changing the culture in Southern Poly, but you were impacting the culture of Cobb County?
Yes. Well, one of the things along the way is I called myself a change agent. And over the years, though, what I was very fortunate to do is all through the military, I was in a group that was all Caucasians. Okay. Then when I finished engineering school and went to work for the Navy, in fact, I was the first African American to go to work at that facility as an engineer. And so all of my life, I had ended up working with Caucasians they understood me, and I understood them. So it really wasn't such a big challenge, because after working, they knew how I thought, I knew how they thought, and see, myself, for an example, I'm not a radical. And so whenever there are situations and problems and concerns, I like to take the way of logic and reason of working through those particular situations. And so one of the things, and I was very good at that, nobody never really felt threatened by me. Now, also, one of the things is that I would do my work, because that was back in the olden days before computers. I would write all of my letters and my correspondence. I would do that at night. And that gave me the opportunity that anytime anybody said they wanted to come in and talk with me, they could come in and talk with me. And so there's also a technique that I had learned along the way, is that whenever someone come in to talk with you, always ask them about their family, their kids, and if they had animals, their animals, or whatever may. And that demonstrated that you cared about them. And so, and it worked. So one of the things, because it was funny, when I left Southern Poly, the person who stepped in to take my place, it was an acting position, he said, "Well, when did you do all of your work?" And I said, "Well, in the evening when I got home, I would sleep for about 4 or 5 hours, and then I would write all of my letters and memos and all the situations I had to live. And so I had time during the day that I was able to listen to the concerns of the faculty and department chairs along the way."
You've been known and called a mentor for hundreds of people. Talk about that, why you do it, and how you feel about the fact that you change the lives.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, good catch.
Good.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, Joe Mack Wilson. Yeah, it's in other interviews. So.
I'm not going to get him to talk about Joe Mack, because it seems like it was
So the question was about mentoring. You have a reputation for having done that, and you shaped a lot of people that are out here in the world today. Talk about why you do that and how you feel about it.
Well, I always said I'd never be a king, but I'd be a king maker. And so I worked at it and helping kids and faculty and staff who work with me, and see, my background, and I have to just kind of say a few words there. My mother had a 3rd grade education, and my dad had a 5th grade education. Okay, and this was back in the days of segregation, so there was no school. So I went to school in the church on Sunday, that very same area, and then on Monday I was back in class. And I usually would say, when I'm going somewhere to speak, is I went through the 1st grade 8 times. Well, naturally, you can see the expression on their face. Why did they bring this idiot here today? But it was a run-room school, and so you had one teacher, and so the teacher could only teach one class at a time. So if you would listen, basically everybody there, they went through the 1st through the 8th grade 8 times and all. And so, but I have a real concern of helping and working with people in different situations, and back in the day with students, encouraging them, and actually just showing that you don't have to be the smartest person it is to go through school. All you have to do is make sure, and we all are good in something. Like I was good in math. I always knew every semester I could make a A in math. I wasn't any good in English, so you might hear me split some verbs and so forth here. But I would balance that out. If I had a course, in fact, I took math every semester and quarter I was in school because I knew I could make an A.
Can I ask you one question? Where was the school? Where were you going to school?
Well, I did my undergraduate
No, I'm talking about your one-room schoolhouse. Where was that?
That was Sneads, Florida. Yeah, and if he's a writer or whatever,
Yeah.
I can give him a copy of that book too.
I got a copy of the book he wrote, so I'll give it to you.
Yeah. It was Sneads, Florida, and I'm gonna just tell another little interesting part about that kind of. Okay, there was a Jewish gentleman that took me under his wing and taught me the telephone trade in Sneads. So I was installing telephones and was the linesman because then you had to do everything. But back in that day, okay, that was considered a white man's job. And so they told me I had to leave. When I was 19 years old, they called me in and said, okay, you've been a good old nigger, but I can't protect your life. Because back in that day, you always had one gentleman over the small town. And whatever that one gentleman said, back then, even if the policeman came, if he said, don't you arrest Harris, and they wouldn't arrest Harris. And so they gave me a date that, okay, that you're going to have to be gone because I can't protect you. And see, one of the things, my parents got afraid because if I didn't go, they might run the whole family out. And so I volunteered, and as I said, it was night during the Korean War for the service, and went, and so that's just kind of a background.
Were you still in Florida at that time? Still in Florida at that time?
Yeah, I was in Florida. Yeah. No, I was 19 years old, had finished high school, and I started working for the company back when I was going to high school. And so I'd worked about a year and a half for the company when they told me that I had to go. You know.
What life lessons did you learn besides being racially offended? What life lessons did you learn as a younger man that positioned you to be a peacemaker, a mentor to young people, etc.? What were your learnings in life? Obviously, if somebody was called what you just said a second ago, I don't dare say that word, never have. I grew up in a small town where you had a black school and a white school, all that kind of stuff, and nobody ever thought about it. It's just the way I grew up, the way they grew up, and it never remotely got ugly. It's just we grew up. Our parents and our grandparents had one way of thinking about things, and didn't think anything about it really.
Yeah, and that was a way of life. Back, as I say, in segregation, everybody kind of knew their place. I stayed in my place and all, and I was somewhat surprised, but I also knew I'm working out of the category. That was what I was supposed to be in. And one of the things is, and when you look back, that was the biggest blessing that ever happened to me, because my dad had 10 kids. So I said, well, if he had 10 kids, I'm going to have 11 because I'm going to have one more. And I had found a little spot of land and all. And that's where I would have been. Because, see, now, in one of the things, in all honesty, all where I have gained through life, if you look back, there was a white person that was in my life that saw something in me and that helped me. So because the thing is kind of funny, time I went to the Army and all, and so and that was back in the day when the Army was segregated. And I said to my boss, and he wouldn't give me a job, and he said to me, well, you won't be around long. And I said, well, where am I going to be? he says, "You gonna be in the stockade." And they only had about 2 or 3 African Americans in this whole big old company. And I says, "I better look for me somewhere to go." And so we was all staying in Quonset huts, and there were people, and where this was a headquarters. Nothing was there but headquarters. And so my person in my Quonset hut, I said, "I need a job." My boss, captain, says, "I'm going to be in the stockade." And he said, "Well, we need an addressograph operator in the finance office." So I went to the finance office, and they said yes, and they gave me the job. But as it turned out, there was a white gentleman that was about 50 miles from Sneed. And he came to me one day, and after I'd been around 2 or 3 days, because there was a lot of northern whites that was in the office, and he said, "We're going to run this place." He says, "I'm going to send you to finance school. And when you come back, I'm going to put you over military pay, and we're going to show these northerners who's in charge." So I go on to finance school and do really well. It was all college graduates up there when I went to finance school, you know. And so here again, when I look back, like when I went to Purdue, my professor, when I was doing the master, saying, "Purdue needs you with your experience." And he set up an appointment, and I went in and we talked to the dean, and they didn't have no resume or nothing but my professor, major professor. And they said, "We're going to find the money to hire Harris Travis." So I have been blessed. So I don't take that one occasion and one situation. In fact, if I could, I would send them a thank you card right now because of the blessing and how I've been able to make an impact on others' lives. Because even one of the things that happened here in Marietta is we were trying to buy some property and was tearing a house down, and someone called and about 37 times and said, "Reverend Travis, I'm going to kill you." And the thing that's funny, the policeman called and said, "We got a threat on your life, and somebody's threatening to blow up the church. Will you come to the church?" And I said, "By the way, now whose side are you on?" And so I called my daughter and said, "Well, we won't go in my car, but we'll go in your car." And we worked all through that, because one of the things as time went along, as a young man, he had too much vodka to drink, and he used to help out around that house. So because what happened, to show you that he got pretty high, he called the police himself. After he couldn't get me, he called the police. And so.
It's tragic and funny at the same time, isn't it?
Yeah. And see, Marietta and Cobb County, we love, and I have always been treated fair and honest in Cobb County. And my wife is crazy about it, because I was looking to be a college president. And she said to me, "Well, if they offer you that job, we're going to have a telephone marriage." And I'm one of those that I kind of sleep on things. I didn't wrestle what is a telephone marriage is. And so the next day I said, "Well, what is a telephone marriage?" "He'll be there and I'll be here." "You are crazy if you think I'm going to leave Marietta and going to leave my home and everything. I love Marietta." And that was great, because once I found out that she was happy here, well, I was just as happy as can be.
I have this little thing on my kitchen is "Happy wife, happy life."
That's right. That's right. That's right.
And the converse, of course, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody.
Ain't nobody. And she's just as happy and just as content here. And so we have been happy. God has blessed us in an awesome and mighty way. And never had, because I'm one of the ones, though, I ain't never been arrested In fact, I'll be 86 Christmas, and I only had 4 tickets. I ain't never had a ticket in Cobb County. I did have one on Interstate 16 at 1 o'clock in the morning, and like I told the police, I was scared. Wasn't nobody out there, and he was back in the bushes.
It's clear that back in the day, to use your term, at Southern Poly, a lot of people would draw their perception of black men based on you, and you had an impact whether you know it or not. If you move the clock forward, I should just ask the question. Tell us about your life as a preacher, and how did you go from the essentially a provost, I'd call it, of Southern Poly, to a pulpit minister? How did that happen?
Okay.
Just talk about Zion. That's be good.
Okay. I was a minister, and when I was back in Lafayette, I had a little church, and I had about 260, 275, wherein 80% of the members were students. And there is the first time, because one of the things back in the day, if you was a Methodist, you didn't see a Baptist on Sunday. And so one of the things there, and I told all the kids, okay, if you're a Christian, you can sing in the choir. So they began to discover, well, there's no difference between a Methodist, a Baptist, and along those lines. So when I came here, one of the first things that I did when I came here on the very first day was ask about a church. And they, the person there, the one administrator that they had, African American, they only had one, and she picked up the phone and called a deacon over at Zion. Well, that Sunday, as I went to Zion, and I was continuing Zion, and they wanted me to teach Sunday school. And so after a year, Pastor Johnson had a heart attack. And so they wanted me to come in and just run things, preach on Sunday, until he got better. Well, that lasted for a year. Then a couple of years later, he got well, but a couple of years later, the same thing happened again.
But you were still working at Southern Poly.
I was still working at Southern Poly, but I was would stand in whenever he was gone. Okay. And I did this for 3 different times, 2 times for a full year and 1 time for 9 months. And then last one day, we got a call about 3 o'clock in the morning that he had a heart attack and passed on. And so the deacons from the church came over to my office at Southern Poly and said, will you retire and come be our pastor? And I said, well, I got to get my retirement all set first, because they was going to pay me about $25 a week, and I couldn't live off of $25 a week. In fact, that's what they gave me, $26 when I started. So I was bivocational for 6 years, from 92 to 98. And so in 98, because they went ahead and they did the search and they called me to be the pastor. And so in 98, I turned 65 and I retired and I went over to the church. And the thing that happened at the church, I just started going over to work at the church, just like I did at the school, between 8:30 and 9, and stay there all day. And one of the things that during that 6 years, I had the time to kind of get a feel. As you know, downtown, there was African Americans, if you're south, north, and also east, that was in the housing project. So when I became pastor, started looking at that and looking at how could the church have an impact on the lives of those people. And so one of the things that we started, we had a after-school program. Now, in the schools today, the schools do the after-school program themselves, but we would write grants, and we would get grants to have after-school programs and summer programs and work with those people who were in the homes. Now, one of the things at Zion, when they built the sanctuary, they just had a sanctuary. They didn't have any classrooms at all. And so I set out to say, well, we need a Christian education building, and we also need to have the community involved. So we would name it the Christian Education Building and Community Center. And so we built our first building, and we reached out to all of those that were surrounded the church and in the community. And we had the community center, see, because if you wanted people to feel that this is for me, when we said Christian Education and Community Center. And after being at Zion for 5 years, I wrote a vision, and I put in this vision everything that we wanted to do. We wanted to build an academy. We wanted to build a larger sanctuary. We wanted to build a larger area wherein that we could do plays and also eat, a fellowship hall, and along those lines. And what happened, I don't believe in doing things by chance or luck. So we hired a consultant to come in and take a look at everything, because we were landlocked, and kind of give us some idea as to what we should do. And that really went well, because it says, okay, this is how much it will cost you if you're going to stay in town. This is how much it's going to cost you if you move out into an area. Well, we have the church that was built by former slaves, so we didn't want to get too far from that. And so my recommendation was that we would have to buy up the land, regardless of what it cost. We needed the land, not the houses, and so forth. And here again, it was really a walk of faith, because back at the time when I became pastor, there weren't too many people there that had degrees. They was just the everyday common labor folk and all. And but I would encourage them to give, and that if we walk by faith, that the good Lord would take care of it. So what happened is, in 1997, I wrote this date, and I also said, okay, by 2003, we would have our new sanctuary built. Okay, now let me back up. In 1998, we completed our Christian Education Building and Community Center. Okay, so now 2003 is our projected, if we could complete our fellowship hall, new sanctuary, and an academy. Well, we didn't complete that until 2007. Now here's where the real walk of faith came in, is I went to the bank and says, if you only approve us for what we qualify for, then we will say that we did it ourselves. So whatever we qualify for, you got to double that amount. And they said, well, we don't see how we can do this. But I was just like singing a song. I kept saying, and they went to New York, and they went to Charlotte and all, and they approved it. We qualified for $5.7 million. They loaned us $11.4 million and all. And we never missed a payment. The only thing, we started out with Wachovia, but Wachovia came in one day and said, well, we don't even want church business anymore. that the Wells Fargo was going to be taken over. Well, that scared me to death. But along the way, I've always been a praying person. Whenever that I was faced with whatever challenge, I mean, going back even when I was a kid. And so I prayed, and the Lord says, you go and talk to John Moore. So I went into him one day and said, it looked like that we're going to need about $1.5 million. And told him the trouble and all that we were talking. And he never batted an eye and says, okay, I'll do it. We just have to figure out how to do it. And so I left, and on my way, I thought about how we could do it. So I called him back and said, well, if you have a capital campaign that's going on, you can borrow money against that. And so he talked with the bank and said, okay, this is the interest rate that you're going to have to charge them. And they said, well, all we want is $1 million. And so he gave them the $1 million and all. And we eventually, they took our loan at his bank and the whole thing. And so, but this was a walk of faith. And so we ended up, because the bank had said, have everything that you need. And so when the building was completed, and we really did some neat things over there, because under the parking lot, for an example, that's where our holding pond is. And then when you get up at our sanctuary and all, and that we had downstairs where we built the facility for movers and food and along, we did drainage pipes way down, that when the water level would come up to a certain level in the ground, it would drain off. And that way we didn't have to go and get a sump pump and all of that to pump the water out. So it did some neat things along that.
Talk about Zion as a church. It has very significant historical meaning. Talk about the church.
Yeah, well, see, Zion was founded by 89 former slaves. Now, also, the rich history, and I have to give so much credit to First Baptist, because what happened back in 1836, they had the first slave to join First Baptist, who got up one, and her name was Dicey. That was in 1836. And over time, for an example, there was a number of slave members. In fact, back during the Civil War, for an example, it ended up that they had more slaves because the old masters had gone off the war. And so First Baptist came to the slaves and says, well, we're going to have 2 business meetings. Business meeting for the slaves and the business meeting for the old master. And they said, well, no, if you're going to do that, just let us meet on our own, and we'll be having a business meeting. And so First Baptist allowed them to start meeting on their own. To start with, there was a few old masters who would be there, but they eventually turned that over to some of the slaves and so forth. And so actually, and that took place in 1856. Zion was founded in 1866. So we look about 10 years later. But they had been meeting. So really what happened when that they separated meeting together is they started having their own church. And so in 1866, when they said that the church was started, well, actually, they just gave it a name, and it was called Zion Baptist Church. Now, one of the things, we are Southern Baptists, just like First Baptist. So, but in order to become a member of Southern Baptist, is you have to serve a 3-year period before you can become, unless there's some reason. So when we put in our application to become a part of Southern Baptist, they allowed us to use the time that the slaves that 10-year period that they were up under, and actually they were first Baptist members, but they allowed us to use that. And so when we made the request, we were able to become full-time, a full-time Southern Baptist. And so we grew. We have about 2,500 members there. But one of the things that I broke was kind of the tradition, because I was there every day, Sunday, and we would work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And I was, see, in a Baptist church is similarities in college and university is shared governance. And that shared governance means the body has to approve everything that you do. And so I would tell them the things like I gave them the vision, and then from time to time, to get a feeling about something, I would do a preference poll. Now, so now this preference poll is not binding, it's just for my information. Because one that really blew me away, I did the preference poll, and I said, well, what time do you want the early morning to start? And they said, we want it to start at 7 and be out by 9. And then I said, well, what time do you want the 11 o'clock service? Well, we want that to start at 10 and be out at 12. And then I said to them, well, how long do you want service to be on the preference? An hour and a half. And so I went before them, said, this is what you said you wanted to do, and I'm sure if this is what you want to do, you're going to approve it. And so they did. And the one I was taken back, all I ever knew was 11 o'clock service on Sunday, and now you're talking about starting at 10 o'clock. But I would go to them whenever there would be issues of concern, and I said, well, this is the problem that I'm faced with. And I says, I really need your help. Because at one time there was a lady who came and said that she was a minister, and she was thinking about joining Zion. And so I went to them and said, well, now I want you to tell me how when she says that she's a born-again Christian, I'm to believe that. But when she says that she's a minister of the gospel, I'm not supposed to believe that. And I need you to help me with this. And to a T. And I just went around to all the various ministries and auxiliaries, and they said, we're going to leave that up to you, how you handle that and all. And so, but I really learned all of this in working with faculty. You shared everything with them. And when you're up front, and see, one of the things, and this probably you wouldn't want to put in the book, but there was a gentleman, and this was a white gentleman that came to me once, and he said to me, now 2 things that you don't want to do is mess with the money where you work and mess with the women who's around there. Those 2 things. And I took him at his word. and all. And see where, but when I was over at Southern Poly, there was never any time that there was any short of money or things wasn't accounted for, because I'm a numbers person, so that and then the same way over at the church. And all of our books was open, and how you had 2 signatures on that. And one of the things, we hired a accountant. Said, no, if we taking in money, we got to have an accountant. And so it was easy, and then the people had lots of confidence and trust, because I have to tell this little story too, because, well, my wife and I, we had one of the places for 55 and overbuilt, and about that time the bottom fell out. So I ended up for 40 some months that I had 2 mortgages to pay. Then over at the church, I made a pledge that I was going to give $100,000 in over 3 years plus my tithe. So now here again, well, stepped out on faith. And so the first thing that happened is in the teacher's retirement, they sent me a letter and said that that was a class action suit. Well, the last class action suit I was in, I got 29 cents. So,
Well,
so I just didn't pay any attention to this. And so they said, well, if you don't give us any information, then we'll take the regular whatever tax out or whatever may along the line. And then one day I looked up there and I had a check for around $20,000. And so I was able to put enough other to make my $3,000 and then another $10,000 to $12,000 to pay my tithe. So I'm just saying, we operated by faith. And when you operate by faith, and see, as I say, when you pray, now because see, I came up in a community wherein you went to prayer meeting on Wednesday night and you prayed. Now we turned prayer meeting night now into when we have Bible study, because I never will forget when they had one high school for African Americans in the little county where I was. And so my dad sent my sister, because she was a grade ahead of me, sent the 2 of us, and we had to ride the Greyhound bus. And then that year that we went, and all after that, he came and says, I can't afford to send you to school in the long run. You got to get out and get a job just like the rest of these boys. And so because when I finished the 8th grade, I was the only student in my class in the 8th grade. And so I prayed. And that next day, the insurance man came, and his name was Dixon. And I said, Mr. Dixon, he was a white guy, do you know where I can get a job? I need a job. And he said, yes, if you buy an insurance policy. And I said, well, I don't have no money, but if you get me the job, as soon as I get my first paycheck. He said, well, my brother is the chef over at Chattahoochee. That was where they had one of the mental institutes, Chattahoochee, Florida. And he says, I'm going to tell him to give you a job. And sure enough, I went there. He gave me a job, and I worked all summer, and I was making $99 a month, and 9 went to taxes. And so I had 270 saved, because I saved all my money, because it only cost 15 cents to catch the bus and along the line. So prayer is powerful.
We only had an hour and a half of tape time, and I want to get to some important things. You had, well, in Charlotte, North Carolina, when they had those racial things going on between the police, and it really was more of a black-white kind of issue. Somebody asked me, David, you think that could happen to us in Cobb County? I said, I don't think so. I think that we have a culture called the Cobb way of doing things that wouldn't allow that to happen. We would talk to each other, not fight, but talk to each other. Could always fight later, but we'd talk to each other. And you were a key part of that. That's a major contribution you made personally to Cobb County. You taught a lot of people how to communicate. And communicate first, don't riot first. Communicate first, and try to work things out man to man, person to person, not black or white, man to man, person to person. You had a great influence, people coming through your church or people you mentored. I'd like a little conversation around that, if you would.
Yeah, well, what makes it easy in Cobb County, and this was a strength of even before I came, there was never any sit-ins and all back in the time when the sit-ins in. The African Americans here over at the church and the people downtown, they got together and they said, this is how we're going to do things. And I carried that on. See, because another thing that happened for years, all the churches downtown and Zion, we met once a year and had a service. And we would go from one church to the other church. So there's a special relationship that exists here in Cobb County. And it's not one of protest or one of being combative and all. And one of the things, I'm blessed that whenever that I would ever say anything or get up and says, okay, this is the way we're going to handle this and we're going to do this. And still that the people still come to me whenever there are situations or conditions. And most times I say, well, okay, I'll go talk to whoever may and talk about whatever the situation and the condition. But it's really a tremendous blessing. But if you look back over the years, it's never been. And like I said, it's another little article that you'll see in the book. See, the Ku Klux Klan got a permit to march downtown Marietta. Well, all the churches downtown Marietta, we got together and said, okay, and over at First Baptist, that we would be over there speaking and praying while they were marching. And so we did that. Now, the strangest thing, when I walked out the door, the Marietta paper had published that Harris Travis told the Ku Klux Klan to cut out their foolishness. Well, I didn't know whether to go home or catch it. And I did say, cut out your foolishness, but we love you. And the good Lord said, well, now, wait a minute. You probably have taken this just a little far. Now, in your heart, But that's just a special, unique relationship that we have here in all. And able to, because whenever there's any situation or whatever I need to go down and talk to the judges or talk to the police or whatever face to face, look, and all. Because one of the things that I always had said is I never wanted to use that 7th floor that they had built. But then we had Councilman Coleman, and he objected to where there was a health facility that was over in Roosevelt, and I wanted to take that facility and work with the youngsters who get into trouble, and when they would get out and to work with, because the reason why people don't do better, they don't know better.
Well, and you're a teacher and a mentor, and like I told that person who said, why are y'all not having racial problems? So we have differences.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's going to take a lot of generations before all of that history that's ugly in our past completely goes away.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, and I've studied other places, it's about communication.
That's right.
It's not a complicated concept, but it's to communicate without boundaries.
And this is true. And see, one of the things, irregardless of what the situation, we're always able to pull together a group here, both colors, that say we care and let us handle it. Now, in another way I always put it, now if you gonna handle it, I'm gonna back away. But you're outnumbered and you're not gonna win this battle at all.
This way.
That's right. You're not going to win it this way. And that we can go about it in a peaceful and understanding way. Because the reason why a lot of things happen, it goes to a misunderstanding. Goes to a misunderstanding, and plenty of time, because you have what you get into, and is that you'll have radicals, and they make their living. The only way they're going to make their living is with fires. Okay, and we've been and we've been blessed here in Cobb County that we really haven't. You have a few people kind of make a little noise, but in general, the ones with reason, like myself and others, that would get together and Streak and Don Johnson and all. But one of the things that I had a lots of influence over African Americans in Cobb County. And when I say, and just dealing, because I've always been fair, above board, never was trying to do anything that was going to advance my cause or whatever may, but advance the cause for the people.
You and in history will write this. In fact, we're writing between you and Strick and Don Johnson, maybe to a less degree. Y'all got to shape the culture of this county in a way that's unique. Do we have problems? Absolutely. Is there race baiting? Is there what do you call it? IDing people, targeting, whatever it's called. We have some, but on the big things, because of your work and Strick, he did a lot of the same things as you will, a lot better than I did. I went over to get his wisdom several times. Not a haircut, but his wisdom. That role was known to a lot of people. You were known as a resource to bring people together. And that shaped the culture of our county, not only up until now, but in the future. You know, we now have an African-American mayor in Powder Springs. Without your work, probably never would have happened. David Hankerson, the selection of Bill Byrne of David Hankerson, forever changed the culture. The first African-American at that level. And most recent, a good friend of mine, Joette Holmes, has set a new standard. So there are a lot of people today that are benefiting from the work that you did. And I'd like to talk about how you feel today, looking back, all the time and effort and personal money you put into this community is now starting to show the fruits of that work.
Well, it's really, it's a feeling that's hard to describe. And when I say that, you're always in life trying to make a difference. And sometimes the good Lord, not on myself, but the good Lord enabled me, because also one of the things in the book I write, the first for about 15 or 20 places that I was the first there. And when you see, if you treat people right, and remember, because see, one of the things you have to be honest with people. Sometimes you have to tell people, you know, you're your own worst enemy.
That's hard mentoring, isn't it? It's hard mentoring.
Yeah, but you are your own worst enemy.
You know, in my long working career, I had some people in my working career that kept me in the straight and narrow.
Yeah.
Provided philosophy about life and how to work successfully in an engineering organization, Southern Company, Georgia Power Company. Everybody needs me. You fill that void, and you've changed history forever, as I've said already a couple of times. Where are we going? Where are we going to be in Cobb County? Where's our culture going to be 10 years from now, 15 years from now, when you and I are both, I hope, in heaven holding hands? Where do you think we're going now?
Well, I believe, I believe that it's all going to continue to fall in place. and things are going to go very well because we have all really been blessed in Cobb County. And people, because it's unbelievable even right now that the people who are seeking my advice and day and night, and will you do this or will you be there or whatever may, and all. Because what makes a difference in lives is that you care. Now, like Deanne Bonner, her husband, well, anytime someone get into trouble or whatever may, I'll call him. You go and get them out. If they don't pay for your bond, I'll take care of the bond or whatever may along the line. I used to go out to jail and do it myself, but you know, at 86 years old, I don't do much going around after dark. But in the future, you know, because one of the things over at the church, I ministered because we had about 40-some ministers when I was pastor, and because something else that's kind of funny, when I was pastor, I preached 2 Sundays a month. The first Sunday where you have communion, and the second Sunday was baptism, and then my associates preached the other time. Now, granted, you got to remember with all the building that was going on, and when I came to Zion, they had no structure or whatever may I could get everybody to come to Wednesday Bible study on one row, and all of that went up to where we had 300 or 400 people during the week, and along those lines.
Talk about the can again before.
We have about 25 minutes left.
Okay, where we're going to. I'd like to know the relationship between you personally and your church and the NAACP, specifically Deanne Bonner, who she and I have been great friends for a long time. In fact, we kissed before, and it was on the front page of the newspaper, which my wife didn't like so much. I don't know if you read that or not.
Well, I know about. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm a former NAACP president, and when I came to Cobb County, because from Indiana, and I was a NAACP president, I kind of connected with Deanne and her husband, and headed up the Fair Share. And that was, I'd go and talk to the banks and the others there about their fair share of minorities, you know. In fact, I'm a lifetime member of the NAACP.
So am I.
Yeah, and here again, we have to give her credit for one of the things of actually trying to work with like the various governments and whatever may, and always low key, not one of the things, well, we got to get our sign, we got to get out of here, we got to be marching, and half of the people that you have don't have no idea why. You know?
Well, I've heard this said, and it was true for me at the chamber. Tim Lee would walk in his office in the morning. He'd have a phone call to return to the governor, a phone call to return to U.S. Senator, and a phone call from Deanne Bonner. Who do you think he called first?
Deanne.
Well, how many other communities could say something like that?
And this is true. There has always been a feeling in Cobb County that people care, because I believe we go back. You remember Stoner? I believe J.B. J.B. Stoner. Yeah, and all. But it was Cobb County is unique.
Well, you returned her call not because you were scared of her, but I think a lot of the people in this community, particularly the white part of our population, is always willing to reach out. and
That's
vice
right.
versa. And you
Yeah.
call her because sometimes she fussed at you, and I told her age one time. She fussed at me really bad. But the outreach and communication, she's a part of our community. The governor is not, and the United States senator is not. They're important, but they're not part of our community. Deanne was part of our community, and she was positioned to be one of the spokespersons. You were to Strick, Don Johnson. There's just a handful of people that guided this culture to addressing differences in a proactive way. There's a lot of things that have gone on in the schools that in some places would be riots.
Right.
And we can sit down together with the superintendent and others and say, okay, how do we work this out?
yeah.
There was that issue down with a police officer in South Cobb that kind of got blown up, and as you probably know well, one of those activists was coming down here, and we came to an agreement as a community, and it wasn't in the newspaper. We
Yeah.
sat down
Yeah.
and did it the Cobb way.
Yeah.
Again, I say that we're not perfect, but we try. We care.
Yeah. And that comes across, and when people feel that you care. Now, one of the things in Cobb County now, when you get along the minorities, is the education level is a lot different than back when I first came. And
You know this from Southern Poly. Education is one of the most powerful tools to equalize people.
that's right. I'm a living example.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I interviewed Lee Bryant, and Lee talked a lot about his mama and daddy, and his family were poor, and they made him and stressed him to go get an education. He would be successful if he got an education, and that's just what you said just now.
Yeah. Well, one of the things in going back when I was in school and in high school was education. And the thing that was funny, now my pastor, when I was in the 10th grade, and he was 50-some odd years old, but it was back, after the Second World War, and so he was in my class. In fact, he was in my English class. And so one day, our test was the question, write a sentence with all the parts of speech in. Well, he forgot, and he sent me a note up to give him the answer. And I did, but I wrestled with that for a long time because he was the pastor, but he was going to cheat. But see, my main point right now, if you won't change behavior, is education. Because see, once that you invest in that education, is you are going to be very cautious where you go, what you do. Because one of the things, I have 7 kids, put 7 kids through college. From 1972 to 1992, I had a kid in college. And one of the things with the kids is that I practice that I love them. I saw to their needs. Might not have been plush, but anyway, it was a way to get by. And still that caring. I had a daughter the other day who's retiring. She came down and says, okay, you got to tell me how to manage my money and how to...
After retirement.
Yeah. After.
The funny is you hadn't handled it so far. What you got is what you got.
Yeah, and all. But what I have found is just being loving and caring, and the greatest feeling was to help the kids, because over at the church, one of the first things I did is we had a paid person looking after our kids and the programs. And those kids over there, they were crazy about me because I also carry a little candy in my pocket that I give the kids. And on Sunday morning, they'd run their mother crazy. Oh, Reverend Travis, I got little Reverend Travis, and all. But and I can't live in a life of turmoil. That's just not my lifestyle. And
So that's
but
what makes you unique.
like I said, I'm a peaceful man. Now, we used to see the movie where they said they're a peaceful man and they pull out and be shooting in the next moment. But in the same way, my wife, she's very laid back and all. Because like I say, and they stop me from saying this at church, I don't have a gun. I don't, Because see, with the gun, you got to know the intent of the person. And most times, it's a surprise. Now, if there's some idiot out there breaking in your house, then they're kind of asking. But I love people, and one of the things, and I know we're getting too close, but at the church, every Sunday, at the close of the service, I would tell them, I love all of you from the very depths of my heart. And then there was a gentleman came up to me and he said, please don't stop saying that. I never have anyone to tell me that they love me. And they knew for a fact that I did, because there was members would come and they said, well, no, I can't stand for nobody to know that I'm in this bad shape, but I need some. And I'd pull out whatever I was. Now, my wife said I'm crazy because I'm giving away the. But I said, well, God blessed me with it, and a reasonable portion of health and the whole thing. But to sum it up, I really love Marietta and Cobb County. The happiest of my years have been right here, and that our intent, my wife and I both, we gonna die here, gonna be buried somewhere around here, and this is home. And it's just been the people. I mean, the people are great. Like to come over there to Southern Poly, only African American, and then you in charge of the academics. I was the first one, the chief academic office at a predominantly white school in the university system, the first one. But when you love people and you care about people and you take care of them, it just makes all the difference. And the